Well, thank you all for coming out tonight. I asked Dr. Nish how to introduce him. I thought I would, the first time I met Dr. Nish was at the first time I met Andy was Kate Brown and Carrie Rush of Fresh Cafe were putting on a sampler. They were kicking off their new businesses. And Andy was the speaker, and he introduced himself. And of course, he at the time was working at Stoddard as a cancer doctor. And then he gave his presentation, and I think I was the first person to raise my hand. And my question was, how do you keep your job? Because the message that I heard was so different than what my perception was of cancer and Stoddard. Not that that's a bad place, but it just you don't hear a cancer doctor talking the way Andy spoke. So it's great to have Andy over the years, to get to know him, and to know him as a friend now has been a real cool thing for all of us. He recommended this book to me, and I always love to recommend books. He's going to basically tonight in an hour take a 400-page book and going to write it down to all of so we can understand it. So you don't have to buy it or read it. It's a little bit expensive. And it's basically, Dr. Lustig basically said the problem of our pandemic of lifestyle diseases is caused by what has been done to our food. That's basically a summary. And the solution to our pandemic lifestyle diseases is whole food. I mean, that sounds very simplistic, and it's got a little bit more complexity to it than that. But this book is very much that way. And it also has a kind of a do-it-yourself. What do your blood tests mean? What does that mean? How to look at blood tests? What's the ratio of your HDL to your triglycerides and all those kind of things? And how do you understand those? And it's a wonderful book. And so Andy recommended that. And when I asked him to speak, I think that's what he's going to kind of be speaking on.
It's a combination of multiple publications. There was actually a really nice publication by David Ludwig, who's a researcher out at Harvard that I've based a lot on. There's another book by Richard Johnson, who's been studying uric acid. There's another book by an economist as well as a physician about inflammation, and not only food inflammation, but societal inflammation. So there's weaving a lot of different resources into this talk.
So we don't have to buy 6 books. We can only, good. Well, that's good. So without further ado, Dr. Andy Nish, thank you.
Thanks, Tim.
You bet.
All right, thank you. Yeah, it's been a few years. The pandemic kind of put a crimp on things, but here we are back to talk about food. So I just want to, full disclosure, those words are not mine. Those are actually Dr. Lustig's. Foodable, not druggable. And I want you to understand by the end of this talk what I mean, because we give lots of drugs, but we don't talk about how to eat very much in our Western medical model. And we're going to go through inflammation. We're going to talk about what is inflammation, what is metabolic dysregulation, and how are they related to the chronic diseases we see every day. So let's start with some statistics. And this is it. No other statistics. But this is appalling. So this was just published in the Journal of the American Medical Association about a month ago. And this is the change in male life expectancy in high-income countries, 22 high-income countries, between 2019 and 2020. So if you look at the top, you see New Zealand actually improved their life expectancy. Guess which country's at the bottom? The United States. We lost, on average, white males over 2 years of life expectancy between 2019 and 2020. Look at our African American counterparts. They lost almost 3.5 years of life expectancy, and the Hispanic males lost over 4 years of life expectancy between 2019 and 2020. It's abysmal. And we spend more on health care by far than any other westernized country. So we are not getting our value for where we are. I looked at this and I just shook my head. You know, what is Albert Einstein? Famous quote. Everybody knows this, right? What is it, Tim? The definition of insanity. Doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. And that's what we do in healthcare. We do more surgeries, we give more pharmaceuticals, and we get worse results. We're losing life expectancy. And for women, it's not much better. It's a little bit better. You know, they're losing 1.5 years on average, but look at the discrepancy between our African American brothers and sisters and our Hispanic brothers and sisters. It's shameful. It's absolutely shameful. So let's talk about inflammation. Many of you have heard this word. It's an essential part of us. It's essential to our well-being. So what it is, it's an ancient and powerful mechanism that allows our body to heal itself. You get a cut, it heals. Thank God. Otherwise, we'd bleed to death. It occurs when the immune system responds to damage or threat. And it's not just the immune system, it's our coagulation system. You slit your wrist for some reason and it stops bleeding. So an acute response, which is time limited in the face of a threat. We've heard of inflammation related to the SARS-CoV-2 virus, right? Tim has firsthand experience. Yeah, a lot of people are ending up in the hospital, not because of the virus, but because of the inflammatory reaction that's associated with that virus invading our bodies. But here's the real problem. Because of our food, because of our society, because of our stress, because of our lack of sleep, because of our lack of movement, because of environmental toxins, because of air pollution, the list goes on, we are chronically inflamed, which is a sustained inflammatory response. It's activated by damaged molecules and cells that are under stress from environmental insults. You are inflamed. How do you know you're inflamed? Well, lots of ways. Weight gain is inflammatory. Memory loss is inflammatory. Fevers are inflammatory. Aches and pains are inflammatory. Depression is inflammatory. So we have all these things we've labeled as diseases, but in reality they're symptoms. Every chronic disease we see in this country is related to inflammation. Heart disease, Alzheimer's disease, autoimmune diseases, cancer. I live in the cancer world, and we're going to talk about that fairly extensively later. These are all diseases related to inflammation. So this is a really, really important concept. But how did we get here? How did we get to this state? And I want to introduce you to a term that maybe you've heard, most of you probably haven't, called the exposome. And it has nothing to do with a World's Fair or anything. The exposome is defined as the sum of lifetime exposures to non-genetic drivers of health and illness, from conception to death, and how those exposures relate to health. And it probably goes back even before conception. The exposome is related to your heritage. So if you're African American and your great-great-great-grandmother was a slave, you're carrying that with you. The exposome ultimately determines whether we are well or diseased through pathways that drive chronic inflammation. The model asks us to reject the model of personal responsibility for disease when so much of what shapes our health is beyond individual control. And I want that to sink in, because we've all been told, right? If you're overweight, what have you been told? You eat too much, you move too little, and that's why you're fat. We want to put it as personal responsibility, and it absolutely is not. It's what our environment is doing to our biochemical, hormone, and neuroendocrine pathways. It's not your fault. It's life in this country. So let's talk about the exposome. And this is really, really fascinating. And this is what we learn in integrative medicine, that it's not about single biochemical pathways, it's about the whole of your life. So what is the exposome? Well, it's the personal exposure to these different things: diet, physical activity, work, toxic chemicals, how you sleep, how you socialize. There's really great data on socialization. Stephen Cole, he's a psychologist out at UCLA, and he says there's nothing more powerful in our health than whether you have good relationships and socialization. And what does that mean? Well, it means you have someone in your life, could be 2 people, 3 people, 24/7, 365, they'll come and help you out. Somebody close to you. Socialization. People who feel isolated or isolated, they lose about 9 years of life expectancy. We are social creatures. We like to gather. We like to be together. Find your tribe. Could be in religion, could be in an organization, could be family, doesn't make any difference. Find your tribe. And then, of course, smoking. We all know smoking isn't so good for you. Don't need to beat that one with a hammer. But then there's the external exposome, our urban environment. Your zip code is a better predictor of your health and well-being than your genetics, by far. There was a study done a number of years ago in Chicago, and they looked at people who lived in the Loop, and they looked at people who lived literally 3 miles west, and you know what the life expectancy difference was? 9 years. Yeah. So where you live matters. Air pollution, climate. We're all under distress because of climate change. Our earth is under inflammation. Our earth is inflamed. It's telling us we've got to change what we do. Green spaces. If you live in green spaces or you live in woods, you live longer. Noise. We don't think of noise as disrupting our health, but it does. Constant noise. Traffic, light. Should be dark at night, but we're exposed to light all the time. And what do those things do? They influence our health, either through our gut microbiome, the expression of our genetics, inflammation, our metabolomics, another new concept. Metabolomics are all these metabolites that we get that are essential to our health that come from production through the bacteria in our gut. Really fascinating field. Epigenetics. Those are things that influence whether genes are expressed or not. And those epigenetic phenomena are passed generation to generation. And then stress and aging. You know, those are responses to what's going on in our environment. We can age well or we can age poorly. So that's a lot to take in, and we could spend hours on each one of those. But tonight, we're going to talk about diet. But I want you to understand that's only one part of what either makes you well or makes you ill. Because we don't want you to leave and say, well, Dr. Nish said I should do this and I'll be fine. No, I don't know your history. I don't know what chemicals you were exposed to as a worker. I don't know your social situation. I don't know your relationships. They're either healthy or they're toxic. So we're going to talk about diet. Chronic non-communicable disease. As Dr. Lustig says, these really aren't diseases. These are symptoms of the underlying problem. So the symptoms are cardiovascular disease, autoimmune disease, things like rheumatoid arthritis, inflammatory bowel disease, psoriasis, you name it. Diabetes, fatty liver disease, neurodegenerative disease, Alzheimer's. We're all concerned about Alzheimer's. Are there any drugs that work for Alzheimer's? No, there's not. In fact, there was a drug that was approved by the FDA last year called aducanumab. And that drug was approved at $56,000 a year. It was rejected by the expert committee that was to review it, 10 to nothing, yet it was approved. Now, it's now been taken off the market because it doesn't work. It doesn't work. So, how do we treat Alzheimer's? We prevent it. It's a lifestyle disease. It's brain inflammation. High blood pressure, obesity, cancer. How many of you think cancer is associated with obesity? 13 different cancers have been really confirmed that they are obesity associated. It's a lot of cancer. What's the disease then? If these are the symptoms, what's the disease? Well, the disease is chronic low-grade inflammation, metabolic dysregulation, and the two are intimately related. So what we're going to talk about tonight is how can you be metabolically healthy to minimize your inflammatory reaction in your body. Couple definitions. Food. This is taken directly from Merriam-Webster. A substance used in the body of an organism to sustain growth, repair, and vital processes and to furnish energy. That's food. Mother Nature provided everything we need. We don't need Kraft, we don't need Cargill, we don't need Nestle, we don't need any of those companies. What's poison? A substance that is capable of causing illness or death of a living organism. Poison is about the dose. Literally anything in our environment can be poisonous. Water can be poisonous, consumed in excess. Oxygen, believe it or not, can be poisonous. We can poison people's lungs with too much oxygen. So literally anything can be poison. It's all about the dose. Cyanide, all it takes is a few particles per million. But it's the dose. Real food. And when I say real food, what do I mean? I mean food in its unadulterated form that comes from Mother Nature. Stuff we pull out of the ground, stuff we have to wash, supports growth, repair, and furnishes energy. Processed foods, they're a slow-acting poison. And the higher the dose, the quicker the action. All food is inherently good, right? Nothing wrong with wheat, nothing wrong with a piece of corn. It's what's been done to the food that's the problem. It's what's been done to the food that's the problem. And that's sort of the emphasis of this talk, and the subliminal message is right here, right? That's what our plates ought to look like. But it's the processing. What we're doing to food and what we're adding to food is what's causing disease. Overconsumption of these processed foods is what's causing us to be metabolically dysregulated and inflamed, along with everything else in the exposome. Over time, consumption leads to disease. Metabolic dysregulation, inflammation, and our ability to heal is what Dr. Lustig says, foodable, not druggable. How many diseases, how many chronic diseases do we cure in modern medicine? Any guesses? Yeah, 0. That's exactly right. Because we're treating symptoms, we're not treating the disease. Tim and I were just talking about this. There's a drug out there called semaglutide. Semaglutide was just approved a few months ago for treatment of obesity. Same drug that we give people with diabetes, but now we're going to treat obesity, and the price has doubled. Wonder why that is. Yeah. So, but we're not treating the root cause of the obesity. And that's the problem with diabetic care in this country. We've always said, oh, it's okay to have carbs, we'll give you more insulin. Well, that's about the dumbest thing on the face of the earth, and you'll understand why. So these chronic diseases are foodable. They're treatable with appropriate nutrition. They're not druggable. They're not druggable. The food industry, this is another concept we have to absolutely understand. We've been told a calorie is a calorie, right? Doesn't make any difference where it comes from. Could come from a Twinkie, could come from a piece of broccoli. It makes absolutely no difference. Food is fungible. Calories are fungible. They're interchangeable. Well, we're not bomb calorimeters, okay? We are living biologic humans that react differently to where these calories come from. Yes. Everything okay? Yeah. Come on in. So this has been just like the tobacco industry. So who owns food companies these days? Tobacco companies have bought most of the big food companies. And they're using the same playbook. Oh, no. It's your responsibility. You're responsible for your health. A calorie is a calorie. You just eat too much and don't exercise enough. We've been told that for 50 years. How's that working out for everybody? Not so well. What we put in our mouth directly affects hormone and metabolic responses in our body. So a calorie is not a calorie. It absolutely is false. It's marketing, it's propaganda. And if I've put a paper at the end here, one by Dr. Ludwig, it really is about energy partitioning. What we eat either goes to give us energy or it's stored as energy. And it's all dependent on what the calorie is and where it came from. The energy balance model. Calories in, calories out. We are not simple mathematical equations. Doesn't work that way. There are hundreds of thousands of biologic processes going on every second of every day that you're alive. It isn't that simple. Food induces very complex hormonal and metabolic responses. So it's not what you eat that's important, it's specifically what your body does with what you eat. What does your body do with a piece of wheat bread is very different than what your body does with a whole wheat berry. It's about the processing. But we've been told we need to eat less. Well, guess what? If you chronically starve yourself, what does your body do? It slows down your metabolic processes. Your body's not stupid. It's not going to die. We have poisoned our mitochondria with our food. So mitochondria are the little things that make energy. ATP is the currency, adenosine triphosphate. It's absolutely essential for every function in every cell of our body. And the mitochondria are what make that. And guess what? Mitochondria were bacteria eons ago. So we developed these mitochondria through those bacteria incorporated in our cells. You eat less, you burn less. You become lethargic. Doesn't work that way. Another interesting concept that we're learning more about is something called the food matrix. What is the food matrix? It's the physical domain that contains and/or interacts with specific constituents of foods, providing functionalities and behaviors that are different than isolating those specific components. So the implication is the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Well, we are a reductionist medical system, right? We break everything down, and cancer especially, into molecular reactions and molecules. And we've done that with food. So the food industry takes food, it takes it apart, puts it back together, and says, oh, this is good for you. Well, it's not, because it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. We have this matrix. And that matrix is so important in providing us with the ability to metabolize food as was intended by Mother Nature, but it also gives us the ability to harvest these nutrients that are so essential for our life. So vitamin C in an orange is a bit different than vitamin C in a pill. They're different. We're just learning about these chemicals called polyphenols. There's over 4,000 of them identified. We don't even begin to know what they all do, but they're certainly important for our life. And here's the other thing I want you to remember. Not only when you eat are you eating for yourself, you're eating for 40 trillion other organisms in your body, the gut microbiome. All those bacteria in your gut, they're providing you with vitamins, they're providing you with metabolites such as short-chain fatty acids. They're training your immune system. They're actually sending signals to your brain. Are you depressed or anxious? Maybe it's your gut microbiome sending the wrong signals. And guess what your gut microbiome is dependent on to thrive? The food you put in. So you feed it polyphenols and you feed it fiber, it thrives. You feed it sugar, you feed it processed junk and all the additives, it dies. So you're eating for two. You're eating for yourself and you're eating for your microbiome. So what is metabolic health? It's the ability of your body to digest and absorb nutrients from the food you eat without spikes in blood sugar, blood fat, inflammation, and insulin. It is estimated, and this is astounding, that 88% of people in this country are metabolically unhealthy. Meaning, if I tested your fasting glucose and your hemoglobin A1C and your liver enzymes and your fasting insulin and your uric acid, one of those would probably be abnormal in 9 of 10 people. It's a disaster. We hear a lot about insulin resistance, and what is it? It's a reduced response to the hormone insulin. Decreased response, increased insulin levels. And we're going to talk a lot about insulin, because insulin is the driver of many of these chronic diseases. We've all probably heard about metabolic syndrome, and what that is, it's basically the inappropriate storage of energy in the wrong place. Okay? Evolutionary-wise, and we can go into the evolution, is fascinating. We lost the ability to make vitamin C about 65 million years ago, so you have to take in vitamin C. Well, that was actually a protective mechanism because vitamin C is an antioxidant. When you didn't have food, you wanted to store fat. Well, if you didn't have antioxidants to kind of quell or quench the reactions in your mitochondria, then you couldn't store fat as well. Uric acid's another one. So we lost the ability to make vitamin C, and about 25 million years ago, we lost the ability to metabolize uric acid. We lost the enzyme uricase. And those things led to us accumulating fat in appropriate times. And those were times when we knew we weren't going to have food for several months. But now we have food all the time, so we store fat in our liver, we store fat around our organs, we store fat in our belly, and this is all metabolically a disaster that's causing lots of inflammation. So what are the causes of insulin resistance? Well, paradoxically, too much insulin. When we have too much of a hormone, our body's smart. It downregulates the receptors. So in order for a hormone to work, it's like a lock and key. Hormone circulates in the blood. The lock is on the cell membrane. It's called a receptor. The hormone binds the receptor, and the action happens. Well, if you have too much of a hormone, those receptors go away. And all of a sudden, we have more insulin resistance. Sugar, the biggest driver of insulin resistance, it's mainly fructose, the fructose part of sucrose, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But that's driving metabolic syndrome. Processed foods, processed grains, spiking our insulin, making us more insulin resistant. We have too little dietary fiber. Fiber is really important to slow the absorption of these carbohydrates that we eat, but also to feed our gut microbiome. Inflammation itself will cause insulin resistance. So when you look at some biochemical reactions in the liver, we see that there's activation of enzymes that cause inflammation and cause our liver to become insulin resistant. Branched chain amino acids, these are really interesting. So there's 3 branched chain amino acids, leucine, isoleucine, and valine. And guess what vegetable has lots of branched chain amino acids? Corn. Corn is loaded with branched chain amino acids. So we feed corn to our cows, and our cows are full of branched chain amino acids. We eat lots of beef, and those branched chain amino acids can only do one of 2 things. They can be stored. Well, where do we store amino acids? Muscle. So bodybuilders eat lots of branched chain amino acids because they're building muscle. Well, I don't see any bodybuilders here. So what's the other pathway for branched chain amino acids? It's converted to fat and stored as fat. So we eat all this branched chain amino acids and get fat. Stress, cortisol. So our chronic stress results in chronic elevation of cortisol, and it does numerous things. One of them makes us insulin resistant. The other thing, it stimulates our appetite for what we call comfort foods. So instead of reaching for the kale, we reach for the donuts. That's not a willpower issue. That's a hormone issue. It's hard to top that. Poor sleep. Poor sleep. Lose 1 night of sleep, and your cortisol is all out of whack, and your fight or flight hormones are out of whack, and guess what? You become insulin resistant. And then gut dysbiosis, this chronic influx of junk food, sugar, processed foods, all the additives, leads to lack of diversity of the gut, and I don't want to, this is too simplistic, but we get too many bad bacteria and not enough good bacteria. Way too simplistic, though. But gut dysbiosis leads to insulin resistance. It's amazing how the gut is so important at regulating our metabolic functions. So insulin is the driver of all this. And so what does insulin do? Well, most people would say, oh, it lowers my blood sugar. And you're correct. But that's not its main function. Its main function is to signal our body to store energy. Signal our body to store energy. It's an energy-storing hormone, but it's also a potent pro-growth hormone that stimulates cell proliferation. And so we can see this in multiple diseases. Cardiovascular disease. Cardiovascular disease. Insulin is causing the cells, the muscle cells and the blood vessels to begin to enlarge, constricting those blood vessels. In cancer, it's a direct stimulator of cell growth. And we've seen direct relationship between hyperinsulinemia and breast cancer risk and survival. So insulin is a pro-growth hormone. It's driving growth of cells where they shouldn't be growing. So what's the key? It's to reduce our insulin levels. Our insulin levels, on average, are about twice what they were 50 years ago. So if we took average fasting insulin levels 50 years ago, today's average is twice as high. How many of you ever had your insulin levels tested at the doctor? Nobody. Yeah, good. You have. How'd you convince them to do it?
I'm a nurse. It's part of the mandatory yearly.
Really? Insulin levels? That's new. That's, well, glucose. How about insulin? No, not insulin. Yeah, and I'm going to explain why that's just it's backwards. It's backwards. So how do we reduce our insulin levels? Well, as Dr. Lustig says, we protect the liver and feed the gut. We eat real food, high in fiber, low in sugar. What we're eating is processed food, which is low in fiber and high in sugar. It's that simple, literally. What does food processing do? Well, it takes off the fiber, takes out the fiber. So I take a wheat berry, whole wheat, piece of whole wheat, and I grind that into flour. What have I done? Well, I've stripped the fiber from the wheat. I've taken away the germ, which has all the nutrients, and you're left with what's called the endosperm. And the endosperm is the starchy carbohydrate that is food for that plant as it goes from a seed into a plant. Well, by doing that, what have I done? Well, I've increased the shelf life. Okay? Once you expose the germ to the air, it begins to decay. It becomes rancid. So the shelf life declines significantly. Now, the food industry will add fiber back, but they've disrupted the food matrix. It's not the same. So processing disrupts that food matrix that's so important in controlling how rapidly we absorb these nutrients and calories and things. We add sugar. 75% of food in the grocery store has added sugar. Go down any aisle, look at any box, and 3 out of 4 times it'll have added sugar. It's a disaster. We've had flavor enhancers, these chemicals that hardly I can pronounce, that the FDA has said, oh, there's nothing showing that these are bad for us, but we test it in labs. We don't test it as a whole. Trans fats. Trans fats were supposedly banned in 2019. They should not be in food, but they still are. Okay, so trans fats. If you see in the ingredients hydrogenated or partially hydrogenated vegetable oil, those are trans fats. The FDA says that you don't have to say on the little label that it's trans fats if there's less than half a gram per serving. So there are still trans fats in our food system. Trans fats, the problem with those is we do not have an enzyme to break down that fat, and those fats muck up our mitochondria, they muck up our cell membranes, and they are absolute high risk factor for cardiovascular disease. Artificial sweeteners. This was supposed to be the solution to our calorie problem, right? Drink all the soda you want because there's no calories. Well, we found there's lots of problems with artificial sweeteners. Number one, they disrupt our gut microbiome. Okay, they're causing havoc in our gut. Number two, they're doing some, particularly our aspartame. There's some issues with neurologic changes. There's also the fact that most artificial sweeteners are used in beverages. So we drink an artificially sweetened beverage. It sends a signal to our brain, and our brain is expecting something sweet. And so we end up eating more solid sweets after an artificially sweetened beverage. Emulsifiers, those things like carrageenan. So you see ice cream, there's carrageenan in ice cream. That's to keep it nice and creamy. There's polysorbate 80. That's in salad dressings to keep the salad dressings from separating. What those are doing is basically they act as detergents in our gut. And our gut has this nice mucus layer that protects the cells of our gut. And those detergents are destroying that mucus layer. And that mucus layer is also important for thriving gut bacteria. So all these additives, yes, they're considered generally regarded as safe grass, but they're not. They're not. So here's a nutrition label. And what do nutrition labels tell us? Not much. Not much. They tell us how much cholesterol is in there. Thank God for that. Sodium, they tell us the carbs. We now know how much added sugar there is, and that was a good thing. But what they don't tell us is what was done to the food. So one of these labels is from flour, and the other one's from whole wheat berries. You don't know the difference. Yet when you eat one, it's going to metabolically be vastly different than if you ate the other. So if you eat milled flour, refined flour, that's going to spike your insulin in an instant. If you eat a whole wheat berry, your insulin will probably hardly even move. So the labels tell us a bit about the nutrients, but that don't tell us what's been done to the food. Real food has no labels. There's no nutrition labels on bananas. There's no nutrition labels on broccoli. Somebody asked me a question, well, where should I shop in the store? Where can I? Oh, Jeff, Angela, this morning. I said, there's only one place that I can guarantee you that it's nutritious. That's the produce section. And of course, Jeff goes, what about the meat section? I said, Jeff, we'll talk about that later. We've got to talk about sugar. We've got to talk about it. Sugar, as I'm defining, is called sucrose. Sucrose is what's called a disaccharide, meaning it's two molecules. One molecule is glucose, which is essential for life. If you don't take in glucose, your liver will make it. That's how essential it is. The other molecule is fructose. There is absolutely no biochemical reaction in our body that needs fructose, and at high doses, it's a poison. Fructose is the bad actor here. Chronic consumption of fructose leads to fatty liver. And this is particularly true of beverages. When you drink Mountain Dew, you're putting this massive load of fructose into your liver. Your liver can only do two things with it. It can metabolize it for energy. Well, you don't need that much energy, or it converts it into fat. So what fructose is doing is it's setting the trap, and then what our other processed foods, our highly refined grains are doing is it's springing the trap. I used to use loading the gun and cocking the gun. I won't use that anymore. Never, ever again. Anybody know what the leading cause of death in kids 1 to 19 is? Gunshot wounds. Gunshot wounds. It's a sad state of affairs. When our children, the leading cause of death is a gunshot wound. So that's why I don't use that analogy. Tim's shaking his head. You know what the third leading cause of death is in this country for adults? Prescription medications.
I was going to say hospitals, but I don't know.
Pretty close. Prescription medications are the third leading cause of death in this country. And that's why I sit here and talk about this. You'll never hear a pill. There are no pills in this lecture or talk. So, what is chronic fructose consumption? Fatty liver, high blood pressure. Really fascinating what fructose does to cause high blood pressure. When we eat a lot of fructose, it cranks out uric acid. And uric acid does many, many things, but one is it decreases the production of something called nitric oxide. And nitric oxide is really important at dilating our blood vessels. Well, when we can't make it, our blood vessels constrict. Fructose causes our liver to be fat. It causes insulin resistance, causes hypertrophy or growth of those muscle cells that constricts our blood vessels even more. What else does fructose do? Well, increases our insulin. Insulin then prevents us from getting rid of salt in our blood. It also stimulates another hormone called aldosterone, which wants to hang even harder onto salt, so we have increased blood volume. So high blood pressure is a sugar problem, at least in the acute phase. In the chronic phase, we get damage to our kidneys, and it's not that simple. Fructose causes high blood fats. You want to drop your triglycerides? Those are the fats. So triglycerides are free fatty acids that are connected to something called glycerol. So there's 3 of them connected to a glycerol molecule that floats around in our blood. You want to decrease triglycerides? Get rid of sugar and carbohydrates. You'll drop them like a rock. Fructose causes insulin resistance because it causes our liver to store fat and become inflamed. And it's also a direct cause of inflammation. And where does fructose come from? Sugar. Now, I want to be very clear on this. There is fructose in fruit. So everybody say, well, should I not eat fruit? No, no, no. It's very different because it's complex. It's about the food matrix. It's complex with fiber. Therefore, small amounts of fructose are absorbed. Your liver can handle that perfectly well. It's these massive amounts that we're drinking and eating that's the problem. So, fructose is the driver of metabolic syndrome. And metabolic syndrome has a definition. And the definition is, we have these criteria. So, abnormal waist circumference, 35 inches in women, 40 inches in men. High blood pressure, greater than 130 over 85. High blood fats, which means triglycerides over 150. Low HDL cholesterol, the quote, good cholesterol, less than 40 in men, less than 50 in women. And then insulin resistance. How do we measure insulin resistance? Well, we measure it indirectly by looking at your blood glucose. So if your blood glucose is more than 100 but less than 126, we call that insulin resistance. Anything over 126, we call diabetes, which is just a much worse form of insulin resistance. Yeah. So what's really interesting is we measure in the clinic blood glucose. But your pancreas has a wonderful ability to crank out insulin to keep your glucose normal for years and years and years. So you can be insulin resistant for 10 years and your glucose may never go up. You just keep producing more and more insulin. We're measuring the wrong thing. We need to be measuring fasting insulins because that's the earliest indicator that you're becoming insulin resistant, not glucose. By the time your glucose goes up, you've been insulin resistant for a decade. Main source of fructose, 45% of fructose comes from sugary beverages. Yes, soda consumption has gone down the last 5 or 6 years, but what's gone up? Energy drinks, Gatorades, juice, all this other stuff. So we're not making as much headway as we need to. 75% of processed foods have added sugar. The World Health Organization, not to be confused as I did on the radio this morning, WHO radio, I said to Jeff, I go, oh yeah, WHO. He goes, you mean the World Health Organization? I said, yeah, that one. So the World Health Organization has come out with this recommendation. It's several years ago. Our daily recommended consumption of added sugar should be 6 teaspoons per day, 24 grams, 6 teaspoons per day. The average adult in this country is eating around 24 to 30 teaspoons a day. And kids, even higher. So every opportunity that you have to get rid of sugar, you then have an opportunity to feed your body and your microbiome the nutrients that they need. I saw a commercial. What was I watching? Oh, I was watching the basketball game last night. And this commercial came on for Kentucky Fried Chicken. And there's a big bucket of chicken, a big thing of biscuits, a big thing of gravy, and a big thing of mashed potatoes. And I looked at that and I said, there's not a nutrient to be found, literally. But that's what we're living on. I don't know how we live as well as we do when you look at this. I mean, you get a little vitamin C from the potatoes, I suppose. You get some protein from the chicken, but you got trans fats because it's been fried. It was astounding to me. It was astounding. But anyway, 6 teaspoons of added sugar per day. That's the recommendation. So obesity, this is really interesting. How many of you think obesity causes metabolic syndrome? Is it the chicken or the egg? And we always thought that obesity was the cause of insulin resistance, but we've got it backwards. You're insulin resistant long before you're obese. Because remember, what's driving energy storage? High insulin levels. High insulin levels. So we know people who are obese, greater than a BMI of 30, which is, by the way, not a very accurate indicator of metabolic health. It's lousy, but it's what we use. 80% of those people are metabolically abnormal. They're insulin resistant. 50% of overweight people are insulin resistant. But here's the real thing that we've discovered. 40% of normal weight people are insulin resistant. So just because you walk around with a normal waist circumference does not mean you are not insulin resistant. We have to measure lab values. We have to measure lab values. As we said, 9 out of 10 people are metabolically ill in this country. So that means 9 out of 10 people are at increased risk for all these chronic diseases that we've listed. High insulin drives energy storage and weight gain. You cannot lose weight without lowering your insulin. So what do we do with people with type 2 diabetes? We give them insulin. Have you ever seen a person with type 2 diabetes lose weight? It's impossible because their hormones are telling them, store energy, your cells are starving. Insulin. Lowers blood sugar, signals the body to store energy, stimulates cell growth. Blood glucose, just a symptom of metabolic illness. By the time your glucose goes up, you've been insulin resistant for years. We're measuring the wrong thing. Tim wanted me to talk a little bit about the relationship of cancer to insulin, and most work has been done with breast cancer. And this is the model that's been proposed, and there's good scientific data for it. We become insulin resistant. This leads to what we call hyperinsulinemia, too much insulin floating around in your bloodstream, which leads to 2 different things. It leads to something called aromatase. So aromatase is an enzyme that converts androgens, male hormones, to estrogen. Well, females have male hormones, males have female hormones. So when someone has breast cancer and it's sensitive to estrogen, we give a drug to inhibit this reaction. It also reduces something called sex hormone binding globulin, but this leads to increased free estrogen. Estrogen is a driver of hormone-sensitive cancers such as breast cancer and also prostate cancer, and testosterone is a driver of that. What insulin does is it also increases some of these other things. It promotes growth directly, and voila, we have cancer. So there's 13 different cancers that are associated with overweight and obesity. Not going to list them all, but I'll list a few. Postmenopausal breast, early and aggressive prostate in males, pancreas cancer. We're seeing a dramatic rise in pancreas cancer. It's going to, by 2030, it'll be the 3rd leading cause of cancer death in this country. Colon cancer. There's been 2 recent papers that have looked at colon cancer's relationship to overweight and obesity, and it's made it even more startling how that association is. And we're seeing younger and younger people with colon cancer. Had a 29-year-old just a few weeks ago, colon cancer, metastatic colon cancer. Kidney cancer associated with obesity. Liver cancer, gallbladder cancer, esophagus cancer, thyroid cancer, multiple myeloma, ovarian cancer. endometrial, uterine cancer, all associated with overweight and obesity. Yeah. So these are our lifestyle factors that are associated with hyperinsulinemia and metabolic syndrome. Processed foods. So as I said, sugar has set the trap. Processed food springs the trap. Because the fructose is causing us to become insulin resistant. And once we're now loading the system with carbohydrates and we're accentuating it even more. And then we have this continuous caloric intake, right? We eat an average of 16 hours a day. It should be just the opposite. We should be fasting for 16 hours a day and eating in an 8-hour window. We eat way too often. And metabolically, the worst time to eat is when? At night. We're more insulin sensitive in the morning. We're more insulin resistant at night. There's actually a diurnal variation in insulin sensitivity. So that midnight bowl of ice cream, it's killing you. It's killing you. Trans fats, excessive alcohol. So the World Health Organization did a paper, I think it was 2019, and they looked at, it was a 500-page booklet. And you know what the final conclusion is? There is no safe level of alcohol for human consumption. Alcohol is an enormous problem. You know how they get sumo wrestles big and fat? They make them drink beer just before they go to bed. And beer has purines, and purines drives the production of uric acid, and uric acid makes us more insulin resistant, and it jacks our insulin up, and it tells them to store fat. Yeah, sumo wrestlers. Too much protein. Somebody asked me earlier about protein. And, you know, we're all concerned about protein. Everybody wants to sell you a protein supplement. I'm here to tell you, in this country, most of us get plenty of protein. Because protein just doesn't come from meat. It comes from nuts and seeds and eggs and beans and legumes and all these other things. Lack of movement. And no, this is not eat less, move more. But movement and using our muscles actually makes us more insulin sensitive. It allows us to make our muscles more insulin sensitive so that glucose has somewhere to go, to be burned in the muscle. Poor sleep patterns. Women who have night jobs, who work overnight, have a 40% increased risk of breast cancer. Because we are metabolically not designed to be up all night. Unmanaged stress, we talked about that. Cortisol. We stress eat. You hear about stress eating. You just eat all the time. But the stress itself, the high cortisol levels, is telling our body we need to store more energy. We're in a fight or flight mode all the time. We want more glucose. So, simple precept. Protect the liver and feed the gut. Real food, high in fiber, low in sugar, it does both of those. Processed food does neither of those. So every time you take a bite of something, I want you to think two things. Number one, I'm eating for two, right? When women are pregnant, they're really concerned about what they eat, aren't they? Oh, I'm eating for two. I'm eating for my baby. Well, we should all be concerned with what we eat because I'm eating for two. My own body and all those trillions of bacteria that are supporting my body. Think about that. Think about that. Everybody's trying to sell a superfood, right? Last week it's blueberries, this week it's avocados, and then there's acai berries or whatever they are. Everything that Mother Nature produces is a superfood because they all have inherent properties that support our health and well-being. And one of the big things about the gut microbiome is we've lost diversity of our gut microbiome. So if you go to some of the hunter-gatherer tribes in Africa, they may have up to 400 different species of bacteria in our gut. We average less than 100. So that diversity is really, really important. It's not about one, it's not about the best, it's about the diversity. And so how do you get a more diverse gut microbiome? A more diverse diet. So when I say eat lots of vegetables, that doesn't mean peas and corn. That means peas and corn and kale and spinach and Swiss chard and beet greens and bok choy and kohlrabi and whatever vegetable is out there. So I would challenge everybody, write down in 1 week how many different plant material you eat. 1 week. Should be more than 30 at a minimum. Actually, we should try to eat more than 30 different plants per day. And plants, and let me qualify that. A spice is a plant. An herb is a plant. A seed, a nut, those are all plants. So, use spices liberally. Use herbs liberally. Those all count because they all have different properties. Green tea is a plant. Coffee is a plant. So those all count. 30 a day. Challenge you to get 30 different plants a day. You can do it. And if you're eating different species of the same plant, those are also different. So you might eat a bolero carrot or some other carrot. Those are 2 different species. Even interspecies count. Different species count.
Why do you have occasional lettuces?
Occasional because they're loaded with carbs. Not a huge fan of legumes. They're not bad, but it's how they're made. So I've got a really nice can of legumes we're going to look at later. But really, your plate should be 75 to 80% fruits and vegetables and a little bit of protein. That's what our plates should be. Beverages, water, coffee, tea. Just a new study on coffee. For all you coffee drinkers that studied 171,000 people and came to the conclusion that it's actually very good for you. I don't personally like coffee very much. I'm a big, huge green tea drinker. But coffee, unsweetened, okay? That means black coffee or a little cream. Caution, 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 caution. Do not drink your food. Juicing food, you might as well drink a soda because all you're doing is getting the sugar from the food and none of the other properties from it. Yeah, you might get a few vitamins and minerals, but do not drink your food. We love to juice. Don't do it because you're losing that food matrix that's so important. And the other thing is we love smoothies. Well, we're disrupting the food matrix when we make smoothies. We're changing the fiber. We're changing the way the fiber interacts in our gut. Forget the smoothies. Just eat the food as it was intended to be eaten. So don't drink your food. And then limit alcohol. I mean, yes, I enjoy a glass of red wine. I enjoy a little glass of bourbon once in a while, but it's occasional. Once or twice a month. Yeah, alcohol is a neurotoxin. It's a direct neurotoxin. It's toxic to our brain. It's toxic to our liver. We talked a little about when to eat. Most of us eat 16 hours a day. It should be just the opposite. What I recommend for people is what's called time-restricted eating. Find an 8-hour window that works for you. The easiest thing to do is finish your dinner by 6, fast overnight, and then by 10 the next morning, you can eat again. Works for most people. But don't eat constantly 16 hours a day. Well, every time you eat, every time you put a carbohydrate in your mouth or protein, your insulin goes up. We constantly are driving our insulin up. So this whole idea of snacking, guess where that was invented? The food industry. Why? Because they want to sell you these little bars and packages. We don't need to snack. Late night snacks we talked about. No eating at least 3 hours before bed. Exercise, walking. There's a lot of traditions. The Indian tradition, they all get up and walk after dinner. Actually is very healthy, improves our insulin resistance. Take a walk after dinner. Helps digest food too. When we walk, we actually digest better. Avoid prolonged sitting. This is really a hot topic. We should be up on our feet doing something every 45 minutes. Don't sit for more than 45 minutes. Get up, do some push-ups, walk around, whatever you want to do. And the other thing I want to emphasize is consistency is more important than quantity. So it's when we can do things consistently on a daily basis, it will pay off great dividends. And some people look at this as a whole and say, oh my gosh, it's overwhelming. So here's my mantra. Oops, in a minute. This is really important. You got to change your food environment. Because guess what you're going to reach for? The chips. You will eat what is convenient. Those chips are really tasty. So I got carrots in the fridge or I got chips in the cupboard. What are you going to go after? Chips. You got to change the food environment. It cannot be convenient. Okay? If you don't have chips in the house, it's pretty unlikely you're going to jump in the car and go to Come and Go and get chips. But if they're there, gone. Eliminate processed food from your cupboards. As I tell people, you should have one cupboard in your house, okay, stores spices, oils, although olive oil, some oils should be kept in the fridge, maybe some nuts, although we keep those in the fridge, and you should have 2 refrigerators, because everything you put in your mouth should have a shelf life of about a week. Real food spoils. How do we do this, though? It's hard. It's inconvenient. I have to go shopping more than once a month. Well, take a few hours each weekend. Find some time in your day or your night or your weekend and prep. Cut up vegetables. Put them in a sealed container, preferably glass, not plastic. And they're ready to go. When we make dinner for my wife and I, we make servings of 6. Guess what? We have leftovers the next day. Pop them in, warm them up in the pan, and away you go. It's about food prep. Here's the mantra. Small changes done consistently over time lead to big changes in your health and well-being. So I want each of you not to look at this as, oh my God, how am I going to do this? Look at it as, what opportunity can I take this week to change one thing in my life to improve my health? So maybe it is, I'm not going to go to Starbucks and get the peppermint cappuccino or whatever it is. Pick one thing. Done consistently over time will lead to big rewards. 2 weeks from now, and the other thing is things done consistently lead to habits. You don't even think about them anymore. Bring your family along for the journey. Okay? You can't do this in isolation. If you're the only one doing it and everybody else is ordering pizzas from Domino's and buckets of Kentucky Fried Chicken, it's just like quitting smoking. It's a family affair. Everybody's in. We're all in on this.
I got a question, if I can.
Yes?
Shouldn't a person, when they are changing a food, that they ought to find an alternative right then and there rather than waiting, like you said, the next month to pick behavior? Because if you don't, then there's gonna be a big difference in regards to what they can do, and they're gonna find out that they'll automatically go back to that. You know what I'm saying?
I'm not understanding.
Okay, when it comes to food eating,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe a person wants to get rid of sugar,
Mm-hmm.
to find another food that will take away that sugar craving, instead of waiting until the next month to make a behavior change for that.
Well,
thing.
yeah, that's a behavior change. So, okay, I'm not going to drink my Starbucks sweet thing.
So you gotta find an alternative.
Right, I'm going to have
So-
tea instead.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's one behavior change.
yeah.
Yep.
So what about putting honey in the tea?
Sugar,
What about raw honey?
raw honey, processed honey, it's all the
Is it
same.
better?
It's metabolically all the same.
Even honey's not good for you, then you're saying?
It's sugar. Is it better than a teaspoon of white sugar? Yeah, maybe, but it's still processed metabolically the same. We've got to get rid of sugar. I mean, when we were hunter-gatherers, we only ate sugar rarely. We'd come across a beehive. We'd come across sweet fruit. But now we're trained to love it. We all love it, but we just got to get rid of it. And people always want to nuance it. What about honey? Well, honey's sugar. What about maple syrup? Maple syrup, sugar. What about agave? Agave's even worse. It's all fructose. So we've just got to train ourselves, wean ourselves off of sugar.
But you have, okay, other than the kind of natural sugars, I'll say, from fruit and everything, so you're saying that we need to eat more natural fruits that contain the natural sugars compared to eating something like a syrup that it comes from, so it's the processing of the syrup that might be bad, not the syrup itself.
Well,
Because syrup does come from a natural place.
yeah, but natural is a word that we should not use.
Well,
Natural
I'm
is
trying
a
to make
meaning, it's a
distinction
meaningless
here.
word. Think about the food matrix. You're okay eating sugar in its natural state in a fruit or a vegetable. Otherwise, anything you're adding, whether it comes from honey or maple syrup, is added sugar. It just comes with a name that sounds better. So if you have your tea and you put in honey, it makes no difference whether you put in honey or you put in white sugar. It's going to metabolically do the exact same thing.
But isn't raw honey different than?
No, still sugar.
Then you
Still
get
sugar.
steaming as well.
That's a whole nother topic.
I'm a diabetic,
Hmm?
and if I eat oranges, apples, bananas, which helps me get through the day,
Mhm.
my sugar just rockets. And so I haven't found anything that I can eat that really,
So do you try nuts?
I can't eat nuts because of my teeth, my mouth, it hurts.
Okay, how about having, some kind of vegetables cut up?
Same thing, if it's raw, I can't, it has to be cooked.
Okay,
So I'm really right now, I am struggling, trying to figure out what can I eat that, because he's on my case all the time about, you gotta do this, and you can't do this, and you can't do that.
well,
And
it's,
it
yeah,
gets real stressful.
Yeah.
So then I end up going and eating something that I shouldn't.
yeah, so, I'm just trying to think. Things that are soft, so you have to have things that are soft. Things like root vegetables, and again, we say that they have a high glycemic index, but they actually have a very low glycemic load. You can parboil things, make them kind of soft and eat them, and you can put them in the fridge and then just pull them out. But you've parboiled them or boiled them to make them soft, they'll stay soft in the fridge. You can do stuff like that. Seeds are hard, I love nuts for snacks because they're very low, they have no sugar, they're very low in carbs, they have protein and fat. But sometimes maybe you just have to take some vegetables and cook them, put them in the fridge as a snack, and pull them out, and just eat them. That would be acceptable. Cheese, do you do okay with cheese?
It varies.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because right now I'm doing a mountain, it's up and down.
Yeah,
On
so
my-
cheese can be, hard cheese, not soft cheese. Hard cheese,
Yeah, oh, yeah,
fermented,
I always-
is
we eat,
could be another way to eat a snack. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So dairy's okay, I don't see you talk about.
Oh, I'm not going to talk about dairy.
Okay.
Too many nuances. So I put in some references that might be helpful. Metabolical, as Tim said. There's another book, Why We Get Sick. This is really about insulin. There's a website. This is actually a cancer website, but they do a really nice job with nutrition. And I want to emphasize, what's preventative for cancer is preventative for every chronic disease. So there's no difference in a heart-healthy diet or a cancer-healthy diet. It's the same thing. But we've siloed this into our own little silos. It's all the same. It's all the same. This was a report put out in 2018 by the World Cancer Research Fund, Diet, Nutrition, Physical Activity, and Cancer. If you need to go to sleep at night, that's about 580 pages and put you right to sleep. There's some cookbooks, The Cancer Fighting Kitchen, Clean Soups. So we make a lot of soup. Rebecca Katz is a really great author and cook. The Doctor's Kitchen, this is a guy from England who has some really nice recipes that uses a lot of traditional Eastern spices, lots of curcumin and coriander and stuff like that. This is an article from David Ludwig about the carbohydrate insulin model and energy partitioning. And this is a really nice, interesting book that if you're really interested in the exposome and all the things that go into our health, and this is really about this is a lot about social justice and how colonialism and colonization has determined the health of generations of people. It's a fascinating book. And it's eye-opening, and it puts a bright light on our racist society in this country. So anyway, that's the talk, but now my favorite part is the demonstration. Can I do this, Tim?
Sure.
It's 7:12. I'm good. Okay. All right. So, go to the grocery store. And here are the two biggest scams in the grocery store. Yogurt and granola. These are marketed as health foods, right? Okay. So, we all eat, in most people's eyes, a healthy breakfast would be a cup of yogurt, a bowl of granola, and an orange juice. That would be labeled as healthy by most people. So let's see how healthy this is. So I went and bought this granola. I went to the Hy-Vee health food aisle. Picked up this granola. Protein. It's got protein in it. Good for us, right? So here's a bowl of granola, and I want you to pay attention to serving size. That's one serving of granola. Now, how many would you think you would eat more than that in the morning? I'd probably double that. But that's a serving size. It's 2/3 of a cup, so that's that serving size. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out my box of sugar here, and I am going to pour sugar into this, and this is a teaspoon, and I want you to stop me when you think that I've poured enough sugar that would match that. Okay, so as I put, you can just, somebody can yell out, stop, that's enough sugar, that's what's in there. So there's one.
A teaspoon is how much?
Teaspoon of sugar is 4 grams. 6 teaspoons a day is our recommended limit. Okay, there's one. 2. Tell me when to stop. 3. 4. Stop. Okay. No, 4 teaspoons. That's 2/3 of your daily allowance, though. So in that bowl, you've eaten 2/3 of your daily allowance of sugar. Okay? So let's go to our yogurt. It's a 4 ounce, 6 ounce peach yogurt, courtesy of Anderson Erickson. And let's add some sugar. So tell me when to stop. Stop? Yeah, keep going. Okay. That's 8 teaspoons. That's 4 more teaspoons. So that is your daily allowance plus 2, and that's what you've eaten. Okay. Now we're going to wash it down with this orange juice. Okay. Juice is juice. It can be natural. It can be added. It's still sugar. So let's go ahead and drink that orange juice. Again, tell me when to stop. 1, 2, 3. Huh? 4, 5, 6, No. 7, 8. 8 teaspoons of sugar. So there's your breakfast. There's your breakfast. 16 teaspoons of sugar. What, 16? Am I doing my math right? 16 teaspoons of sugar. That's almost 3 days worth of sugar for breakfast. You've not had a donut. You've not had a pastry. You've not had a sweet drink from Starbucks. You've eaten what many would consider a healthy breakfast. Orange juice, granola, and yogurt. Biggest scams in marketing history. Now, can you find yogurt that's healthy? Absolutely. You buy plain, unsweetened yogurt. It will have sugar, so it'll say total sugar, 6 grams. Well, that's lactose. That's milk sugar. So it's a combination of glucose and galactose. But then you look at added sugar. It will have 0. Yeah. But that's, to me, astounding. That's your breakfast. That's your breakfast. Okay, so let's look at some other common things that you might buy in the store that you think are healthy. Oh, let's have a piece of toast with breakfast, right? Let's have 2 pieces of toast. Or let's make a sandwich for lunch. So this is Dave's Killer Bread, 21 whole grains and seeds, 260 milligrams of omega-3, they must throw a little flax in there, 5 grams of fiber, they add it back, 5 grams of protein. So in 2 slices of bread, let's see how much sugar's in there. One, 2. Anybody want to stop yet? 2.5. 2.5. 2.5 teaspoons of sugar in 2 pieces of bread. That blows my mind. Why do we have to put sugar in bread? What's the purpose? Because we're addicted to sugar. And we buy it and we love it. But it's killing us. So now you can take that 16 teaspoons in these 3 things, add a couple pieces of toast, and you've had 3 days worth of sugar. And you haven't even gotten off the breakfast table. And guess what's going to happen in 2 hours? Yeah, you're going to want more because you've had this enormous glucose spike. Your insulin is going to go up to counteract it. It's going to shove that glucose into cells, and then all of a sudden you're starving again. So what do we go for? Oh, somebody in the office brought donuts today. I'll have a couple of those. And we start the cycle all over again. Now, let's counter that with, I just had a breakfast of 2 eggs, asparagus, onions, spinach, and a bowl of berries. My glucose doesn't go up, my insulin doesn't go up, and I'm not eating again until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Yeah. Let's see what else I got in the bag. Oh, this is a good one. Anybody drink gin and tonics? Tom Collins, gin and tonic, whatever. Tonic water. Tonic water. Let's see how much sugar is in tonic water. Again, tell me when to stop. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and a little bit extra. 7 teaspoons of sugar in that tonic water. And then you mix it with alcohol, your liver's screaming. Yeah, tonic water. We wouldn't even think, people wouldn't think twice about it. Yet when you look at it, there's 29 grams of sugar in there. Tonic water. You know, the one that really kills me, condiments. Condiments. So let's look at this barbecue sauce. And I'm not going to open it and squirt it into 2 tablespoons as a serving. So 2 tablespoons is the same as 6 teaspoons. Okay, but how much sugar is in that 2 tablespoons? Just let me know when you want me to stop. 1, 2, 3, 4 teaspoons of sugar. 4 teaspoons of sugar. That means in the 2 tablespoons of barbecue sauce, a tablespoon and a third are sugar. So what do? We slather this on our ribs and don't even know we're consuming this much sugar. 2/3 of a day's worth of sugar in 2 tablespoons of barbecue sauce. Huh? Oh, yeah, who uses 2 tablespoons? You're going to use a 1/4 cup of this stuff. You can double that up. You can have a couple days' worth. No problem. I said we're going to get to legumes, the grilling beans. So, this can says there's 5 servings in there. A little hard to believe. But I took some lentils that I had because I didn't have regular beans. That would be a serving. I think there's 5 of those in there. Anyway, let's call it 1 serving. And let's see how much sugar is in that 1 serving. 1. Tell me when to stop. 2. 3. Oh, you guys are pretty good. 4. 4? No, we're going to keep going. 5 teaspoons of sugar in 1 serving of baked beans. A day's worth of sugar in a 1/2 cup of beans.
What would it be if it were just the beans without all the stuff they put into that?
There wouldn't be any sugar. 0. There'd be carbs, but not sugar. There'd be carbohydrates, but not sugar.
So black beans or pinto beans.
Yeah, they're fine. Just don't sugar them to death.
Right.
Yeah, don't sugar them to death.
So hummus wouldn't be good because it's processed garbanzos.
I'm sorry?
So hummus would not be good because it's processed.
Well, yeah, it is processed. It's not ultra processed. It's just basically smashed.
Yeah.
So I eat hummus all the time because I eat it with vegetables and things. So yes, technically that's, quote, a processed food because we've disrupted the food matrix, but it's not an ultra processed food where we've taken everything apart and put it back together again.
You make
So
it
how's that
yourself.
different from a smoothie then? Because a smoothie is just crushed.
It is, but again, you know what? It's disrupted that food matrix. So I eat hummus because I like a dip. Smoothies, I don't know. I just try and eat everything as close to natural as possible. So I don't do smoothies. You know what? If I want to eat strawberries, I'll eat strawberries. If I want to eat spinach, I'll eat spinach. But I want to eat it in its form closest to the natural thing. And so, yes, exceptions. Guacamole, smashed avocados. So I'm smashing it. I'm not grinding it, which is different than smashing it, actually. The grinding really disrupts that, particularly the insoluble fiber. All right, and I've got to do this last one only because it still blows my mind. Oh, yeah. Mountain Dew. Mountain Dew. How many are we going to put in here? Okay, here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, no takers? 12, nah, not even close. 13, 14, I got to dump it in a bigger bowl. 14, any takers? 15, 16, my teeth hurt, 17, 18, 9, well, that's a short one, 19, and a third. 19 teaspoons of sugar in that sucker. And these kids are drinking it like wild. And adults, but these teenagers. 19 teaspoons of sugar. That's 3 days worth in 20 ounces. You'll drink this in 5 minutes. Now, you could get away with this if you drank it over about 8 hours. Your body could handle this over 8 hours. But no, we're not drinking this over 8 hours. We're going to the quick trip. We're getting in the car. We're down in this thing in 5 minutes, and away you go. Who in their right mind would eat that?
Apparently we're not in our right mind.
You know what? We have no recognition. We don't recognize what's going on in our food system because the marketing doesn't allow us to recognize it.
You know what's really very troubling is the food scientists that work for the food company, they have to know that this is killing people. So the sacrifice for money is people's lives.
Same thing as tobacco. Same thing as tobacco. We're doing the same thing. Now, the interesting thing is, so, you know, talk about soda taxes, sugar taxes. They actually work. They actually work. They get people to drink less sugary beverages.
What did you say they are?
Soda taxes. Taxes on sugary beverages. Go to San Francisco, you're going to pay an extra dime for every ounce of sugary beverage that you buy or whatever it is. Go to Philadelphia, you're going to pay a tax on that, just like a cigarette tax.
Well, that's a good idea.
Yeah. So, anyway, I want people to visualize what's going on with their food. You notice I didn't bring a bag of produce because produce is all healthy. I brought this stuff, which we consider healthy, right? Everybody eats bread. There's sugar in almost every bread. Now, this one is exceptionally high. 5 grams per serving is high as I've seen. There are some breads. Anybody know Ezekiel bread? So it's a cracked wheat bread. That doesn't have any added sugar. One of the few that I found that doesn't. My son and I were in the grocery store a few weeks ago, and we came across Hostess snowballs, these little fluffy 3-ounce things. They had 8 teaspoons of sugar in them. I'm like, holy mackerel, you'd eat one of these in 30 seconds. It's amazing. We've adulterated our food supply to the point where we're literally killing everybody. Again, the poison's in the dose. That's the dose. So I hope you've become, maybe gained an awareness. And, you know, as far as, you know, what you were talking about, you know, I would try vegetables, you know, pick some vegetables you like, cook them partially, and just eat them cold. You know, that they're soft. That might be a good idea. But yeah, it can be difficult.
I just have trouble getting my meals, and so to sit down and get a meal, because if I don't eat enough food with the other medications I'm taking, I can't function. I mean, I'm lightheaded and dizzy, and
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I go back to the doctor next month, and I know what she's going to say.
So if you don't eat, does your glucose drop?
Not always.
Do you wear a continuous glucose monitor? You should try it. Continuous glucose monitors are amazing tools because it really gives you real-time information as to what that food is doing to me. Pricking your finger 4 times a day doesn't give you real-time information.
And you get numb fingers.
Yeah. Continuous glucose monitors are a wonderful tool to teach you what works and what doesn't. So that you know, oh, I ate that banana and my glucose went to 600. Not good. No more bananas. They're a wonderful tool for monitoring your response to foods. Ask her about prescribing you,
Oh, I've tried that.
They won't? Oh, you have?
I've talked to her about it, and your insurance won't pay for it.
That's
I know.
That's complete nonsense. Insurance will pay for it for type 2 people, people with type 2 diabetes. They won't pay for it for the general public who wants to know what's going on, which is, again, ludicrous. I actually enrolled myself in a study, and they sent me a continuous glucose monitor. It was fascinating. I learned popcorn spikes my glucose. Yeah. It's fascinating. And it really trains us. And I think it's a great training tool to teach people like, oh, I better avoid that. What I'd really like to know is I'd like to continuous insulin monitor, but we don't have that.
You and I were talking a couple of weeks ago. You asked about monitoring insulin, and you told me what it costs to monitor insulin, and they don't pay.
Most insurance won't pay for a fasting insulin because it's, quote, not recommended by our big societies. Well, our big societies are somewhat self-serving, right? They're in the business of treating diseases, but they're not in the business of preventing those diseases. I have a real problem with all these societies. Most of them are sponsored by, guess who sponsors the American Diabetes Association? Coke or Pepsi, one of the two. Gives them money. Really? You're going to take money from a company that's killing the people you're supposed to be taking care of?
And then skew the results so it figures out right for them.
Well, yeah, that's research is a whole other issue. Nutritional research, even pharmaceutical research. Most pharmaceutical research is biased and inaccurate. Yes, sir.
What is a normal insulin level?
So, every lab is a little bit different, but normal insulin is going to be anywhere from, most of them are going to say 7 to 24. Wide range. I would tell you if we are metabolically normal, our fasting insulin should be less than 5. 5. Yeah. Micrograms per deciliter. Kombucha.
Raw. What's your opinion on that?
So I love kombucha. It's a great source of, probiotics, right? But what most kombucha does is they flavor it, so they add back juice. They don't do a complete fermentation, and you end up with a lot of sugar in it.
This is raw,
But how much sugar is in there?
12 grams.
Yeah, that's because,
Added sugars.
yeah, but that's from the juice. That 12 grams of sugar is the juice they added back to flavor it, and they didn't do a complete fermentation to get rid of all that sugar. In order to ferment something, it has to have a source, and that's sugar. Yeah, yeah. Because kombucha that doesn't have juice added back is actually pretty tangy. It's pretty tangy.
What about 100% juice?
It's all sugar. This is 100% juice. And that's 8 teaspoons of sugar you just drank.
But isn't that coming directly from all the fruit?
It is. But there's no fruit. There's no fiber to slow the absorption of that sugar. So you're drinking, you might as well take 8 teaspoons of sugar, put it in water, and drink it, because it's the same thing. Kind of. You're getting some vitamin C. But that's the thing. It's just sugar. So we use the word natural because natural is a marketing term. What the hell does natural mean? I mean, what does natural mean? We all think, oh, it came from something in our, in the environment, therefore it must be good for me. But again, as I said, it's not the food that it's inherently bad, it's what's been done to the food. So we took perfectly good oranges and we squeezed 6 or 8 of them into this to give you juice, so you're now eating the sugar of 6 to 8 oranges without the benefit of that food matrix to slow the absorption of that sugar down. It's processed.
So it's better to make your own juice.
No. No juice. No juice. No juice. As I said in there, do not drink your food. Don't drink your food.
Eat the orange.
Eat the orange, but do not drink your food. That's just, to me, a great rule. Don't drink your food. Eat your food. Mother Nature did not put juice spigots on the trees. She gave you oranges. She gave you apples. We've processed it. So we've said, well, I'd rather drink it. Well, that's getting us into trouble. So you don't want to drink your food. You want to eat your food.
I got another question about Ezekiel breads. It's okay because it has no added sugar, but it's still a carb, right?
Absolutely. But again, here's the thing. So we all have, depending on where we are in the metabolic spectrum, we can all tolerate carbs a little bit differently. And that's why it's so important, if I'm consulting with someone, I want to know what your labs are. I want to know where you are on that metabolic spectrum. So I can tell you my insulin level is 1.7. I can eat carbs with very little problem. But if someone comes to me and their fasting insulin is 15, carbs are going to be a big problem. And I need to make sure that as I'm advising those people, that we're getting rid of all the starchy refined carbs and that their only carbs are coming from fruits, vegetables, and nuts. So it really is about where are you on that metabolic spectrum. The best source of carbs is closest to where it came from. So these are lentils. Nothing wrong with lentils. Lots of fiber, lots of protein. As far as beans, these are the lowest carbohydrates, lentils. Some beans are very high in carbs, a little lower in protein, a little lower in fiber. But it really depends on where you are in that metabolic spectrum.
Andy, I have a question for you about who do you know in the city that does blood work and then goes over with folks and helps them, like Lustig does, I think it's chapter 9, where he says it's a do-it-yourself. You have the blood work done, you understand what the blood work means, he recommends insulin, obviously we don't have that, but you go through that. Who does everyone in this room go to that's going to look at it in that manner to help people go, hey, look, you're here. This is what you need to go to do here because this is not good. This is metabolic syndrome or dysfunction.
You know, I think you almost have to take it on yourself and say to your doctor, these are the labs I want. I want fasting glucose. I want a hemoglobin A1C. I want a fasting insulin. I want liver function test. I want uric acid. I want highly sensitive CRP. It's an inflammatory marker. And DROM. Well, you don't need them. DROM. It's just, we're just stuck in this paradigm of what we learned 30 years ago, and it's out of date and it's out of mode. Because all we're concerned about is treating the symptoms, not the disease. So when we treat someone with diabetes, I just read this the other day. Oh, we'll be able to treat your diabetes, but it's not reversible. Bull crap. It's completely reversible in many, many cases. So pre-diabetes. Probably 100 million people in this country have pre-diabetes. It's defined as a blood glucose between 100 and 125, 26. That is people come and say, well, my doctor says we're going to watch it. You're going to watch it do what? I look at it as this is the perfect opportunity for you to make a lifestyle change so that you don't go to the next level, which is diabetes, something you don't want. But we don't treat it that way. We treat it as a warning that, well, we might have to put you on medication. I treat it as an opportunity that you can reverse this, and here's how. But I'm going to tell you, our current medical system is, so in medical school we probably get, 2,000 hours of pharmacology, we get about 10 hours of nutrition. And that's the problem. We're pharmacy-centered. The pharmaceuticals have ingrained their propaganda at the medical school level. So these poor students don't know anything else. There's another book that I read, and I can't remember the name of it, but this guy, he was working with medical students, and he was drawing fasting insulin. And these medical students were mystified. We've never heard of that before. And he had to explain to him why he was doing that, because it's an early marker of metabolic dysregulation. But we have little interest in this country at preventing a disease that's completely preventable because we're taught to treat that disease. And that's the whole problem with the system. So unfortunately, for all of you, we have to be advocates for ourselves and say, I want to know what my fasting insulin level is. And most docs will have no idea what to do with it. Well, it's 15. That's in the normal range. No, that's way too high. You're already metabolically dysregulated. So I wish I had an answer, Tim. I don't. I don't have practitioners I can say, oh, go to her. I don't know the answer to that. And I think Lustig makes a point of that. It's incumbent upon ourselves to learn a little bit so that we can advocate for our own health and well-being. Because we're not being supported in our current medical system for improving our lot. We're just treating whatever comes up. And I wish I had I'm embarrassed that I don't have an answer for that. It's completely embarrassing.
Do labs actually do fasting insulin if you can?
They will. You're going to pay for it. No insurance pays for it.
Is it like more than just one draw? You sit there for hours?
Oh, no. It's just, you know what? It's a routine blood draw.
Okay.
Add on a fasting insulin. And they'll look at you like, well, we don't do that. It's meaningless. Because...
What do they give you when you do your A1C?
What do you mean, what do they give you?
Okay, what's the information they give you when you go in for A1C?
So A1C is a measurement of your average glucose over a 90-day period.
Okay.
So what it's telling you is how well regulated your glucose was for that period of time. And it's called glycated hemoglobin. So as our blood sugar increases, those sugar molecules are binding to protein molecules. It's called advanced glycation end products. And it's really a measurement of how much blood sugar is causing havoc with our proteins. And so when it gets to a certain level, we then classify you as diabetes, 6.5. If it's between 5.6 and 6.5, we say you have prediabetes. So it's a marker of metabolic dysregulation, and it's a marker of these proteins being what we call glycated with these sugars. So it's, again, just a marker to tell us that you're dysregulated.
So what was the other test you said? Glucose level?
Insulin.
Insulin level?
Mm-hmm. And then we get liver tests, because liver tests can give us an idea whether you're storing fat in your liver already.
Okay, and that's then, let's see, I thought I had the, trying to think what I was thinking and I lost it.
So the liver test is what actually they do on a regular blood test?
Yeah, a lot of them, they'll have what's called the complete metabolic panel that include a kidney test, a glucose, and electrolytes, and all the liver tests. Yeah.
Does insurance cover that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just a quick question. Are you,
Go ahead. What's your diet look like? I'm just interested.
Well, start out the day, I kick it off, get out of bed with one of these. No, I'll answer that. Go ahead.
as a weightlifting thing?
Yeah.
Organic versus non-organic and, regular beef and stuff is a very critical.
Oh, it depends on how much money you have.
Well, that's why I was wondering.
So, yeah, let me just briefly say, you are better off eating non-organic fruits and vegetables than processed food. That's just bottom line. If you can afford to eat some organic, go to the Environmental Working Group, ewg.org, and they have two lists, the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen. The Dirty Dozen are the fruits and vegetables that have the most pesticides. Those are the ones I recommend buying organic, if possible. But certainly, I would never say, don't eat fruits and vegetables if they're not organic. Go ahead and eat the Doritos. No. No, absolutely. What's my diet like? So I try and go at least 15 hours between meals. So we kind of eat late at our house, so a lot of times we're not done until 7 or 7:30. I get up at 6:15 the next morning, and a lot of times I won't eat till 10 or 11. So my first meal of the day is this bread we make called adventure bread. Now everybody's going to say, bread, flour, processed, but it's different. It's seeds and nuts. So it's basically sesame seeds, pumpkin seeds, chia seeds, sunflower seeds, almonds, walnuts, some whole oats, olive oil, and water, and a little salt. We pack it into a loaf pan, we shove it in the oven, cook it for an hour, and then we slice it and we eat it with toast. So I usually have two pieces. One will have smashed avocado. I'll just take slices of avocado and put it on with pea shoots or broccoli shoots. So these little shoots that they sell, they're incredibly, incredibly nutritious. And then I'll eat that with a little vinegar and oil dressing on it. And then I'll usually have another piece with almond butter and about a teaspoon of jelly. I get 4 grams of sugar in my jelly. And then, you know, that's my 10 o'clock, 11. I eat kind of funny. Then I'll go ahead and eat again at 3. And I'll usually fire up some eggs, spinach, kale, whatever's in the fridge. And this time of year, it's asparagus, onions, and eat that with a bowl of berries, some plain yogurt, and some granola that we make. No sugar. And then dinner is usually 3 vegetables, a salad, and a piece of meat.
What did you say, 3 vegetables, what?
Salad and a piece of meat. So we don't eat meat every night. You know, we'll try and eat fish, especially this time of year because the salmon is coming in, and so we can get good fish this time of year, poultry. But I'm not hesitant. I eat a steak probably once a week. But it comes from my grass-fed farmer, not my feedlot. Yeah, that's kind of what we do. And then we eat a lot of chocolate. So chocolate is incredible, but you have to eat. You got to eat more than 70% dark cacao, because otherwise it's just all sugar. So the stuff we eat is 90%, and that takes a little bit of getting used to. But it has lots of flavonoids. It has actually a tremendous amount of fiber, believe it or not. There's a lot of fiber in chocolate. Yes, sir?
Did I miss what you said about nut butters?
No, so let's talk about that, because nut butters are processed, okay? They have to be ground or smashed. So there is a bit of processing in that. So you're losing some of that food matrix, but yes, we eat a lot of nut butter.
Okay, you like nut butter.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I just remember my mother, when I was young, said you could live on peanut butter. Is that?
You know, there's an interesting, so I don't know if any of you heard this nutritionist. Her name is Sally Fallon, and she wrote this huge book a long time ago. And it's kind of very old-fashioned and very old school, and she was very much against the current dietary thoughts of it's all about calories. And somebody asked her the question, she goes, if you were trapped on a desert island and it could only take one food with you, what would it be? And her answer surprised me a little bit. Butter. Nut butter, cow butter. Butter, yeah. If I was trapped on an island and I could only have one food, walnuts.
What about finding food on the island?
Well, this was a theoretical. If somebody said, what food would I'd say almonds. Omega-3 fats, good protein, almonds, walnuts. Yeah.
Except for until if you're on an island, you got fish around you.
I know, but it's theoretical.
Peanut butter is okay then?
Yeah, peanut butter's okay.
You just have to read the,
I would buy organic peanut butter, to be honest with you, because peanuts can sit around and they can get a mold called aflatoxin. So
that's right, okay.
Like they normally find the original stuff.
I love
fresh
peanut
out of
butter.
Doesn't a lot of peanut butter have added sugar?
Well, yeah, Jif has added sugar. And this is another thing you got to be careful of with nut butters. Nut butters, when you look at the ingredient, should have one ingredient, and that's whatever nut it is. A lot of them add palm oil. And palm oil, number one, it's environmentally destructive, and number two, it's a bad oil. It's not good for you. So there's a brand called Justin's. Don't buy it. It's all got palm oil in it.
That's in the health food.
It is in the health food, yeah. But it's got palm oil. So when you buy nut butter, it should say one thing: peanuts, almonds, cashews, whatever it is. Okay. Anybody want a bowl of sugar?
Thank you.
You can have this, or you can have this. It's exactly the same.
Yeah.
Oh,
Thank you
man.
so much.
Yeah, thanks. Let's give a round of applause.